Today we're going to talk about food safety in the cannabis industry, and more specifically, what are those certifications that you can get, where the industry is going, and how we can keep the supply chain safe and what's going on with cannabis and for hemp. So, who are we? The Perry Johnson Companies, we're a global certification body for numerous quality and ISO standards. You guys may have heard of ISO 9001 or good manufacturing practices, things like that. We actually have 3 divisions under one company. We have Perry Johnson Registrars, which does the classic ISO 9001, aerospace, medical devices, things like that. We have Perry Johnson Registrars Food Safety, which is the division we're speaking about today. We're a global certification body for all major food certifications, from farming to processing to distribution. And within that division, about 3 years ago, we started doing cannabis and hemp food safety audits and programs. So we have good agricultural practices, good manufacturing practices, ISO 9001. We're also certified for USDA organic, for hemp crops, and for products. Our sister division, which I was actually hired in through, is Perry Johnson Lab Accreditation, which is a global accrediting body for the ISO 17025 standard, which some of you may be familiar with. If you're not, if you want to test marijuana in any given state, including Michigan, your lab has to be accredited to this standard for you to get your state licensure to be able to test those products. So I always like to start with kind of a little recap of what's going on in the industry. Obviously, the election in 2020 brought some other states on board. A couple states that weren't even populated on this slide, Connecticut and Virginia. As of July 1st coming up, you're going to have 4 plants. To a certain extent, it's been decriminalized, and that's going to be a pretty big state. They're going to be issuing 450 grow licenses. You've got to show $1 million liquidity in the bank, and they haven't determined yet how many of those are going to be outdoor grow versus indoor grow, so that should be pretty interesting to see. In 2019, in July, just about 2 years ago, Michigan sold a total of about $30 million in total sales of adult use. You can see the split there between flower, infused, and things like that. And to give credit to the state of Michigan, their analytics of what they're reporting have gotten much more detailed and much more clear since 2019, so I think that's great. July 2020, it went to 52 million. As the market has grown here, more licenses have been issued, people are getting up and running, more efficient. Some of you in this room are probably participating in it. And now, as of May 2021, almost 140 million in Michigan. So that's pretty substantial. Is that going to keep growing? Absolutely. More licenses are being issued, especially for grows, and I think that that revenue for the state is going to continue to grow. In terms of hemp trends that were in 2020 coming into 2021, as you know, the hemp market was saturated. The average cost per pound was anywhere from $5 to $15 a pound for hemp. Less acreage has been getting planted as the market tries to stabilize with supply and demand, as some of you may be involved in. Interestingly enough, about 60% of extractions were from ethanol versus CO2. And also within the hemp industry, as we'll talk about here, as well as cannabis, but especially hemp, CBD products are mislabeled. Not all, but the stuff you're seeing at gas stations, mom and pop stores, little boutiques, the dosages are wrong, they're being mislabeled. There's been a lot of secret shopper type situations in Minnesota and California where products may not even have CBD. They may be testing hot and pesticides, residual solvents, heavy metals. So be very wary of your supply chain, where you're getting CBD from. Do those folks have a good manufacturing practices, certificate, things of that nature. So just because it's in a pretty package and sold in a pretty store doesn't mean it's necessarily a good product. So definitely beware of what you're purchasing. State of Maine went legal, sold 1.4 million in its first month. It's now the top agricultural product in the state and is surpassing lobster in sales, which is pretty unbelievable. Again, cannabis recalls are continuing in the industry. Not so much in Michigan, but the biggest things are mislabeling and products testing hot for pesticides and residual solvents that are somehow getting through the supply chain. Again, our home state of Michigan had 140 million in May. Colorado had 206 million in April, just about the same time frame. And California was at 331 million based on a first quarter average. So California clearly still is, top revenue in the nation right now, although their black market is pretty rampant. That number could go even higher in the years to come. In Canada, as you know, it's federally legal for the entire country. There's a lot of operations there that are exporting to Europe, hemp and cannabis. There's a particular food safety certification that we'll talk about in a bit called ISO 22000. That is trending as to be a de facto certification in Canada for edibles. That program is still being worked on, but is definitely coming down the pipeline. And in March 21, total sales for the entire country were 247 million US. So if you remember the numbers we just talked about, the state of California outsold the entire country of Canada. Don't know how that is or why or what the consumption rates are in Canada. I just talked to a couple of folks, a couple of consultants out of Canada who would debate that more cannabis is actually being exported out of Canada right now to Europe than is actually being sold in Canada itself because they're able to do that on a federal level. So, at some point in the future when this happens in the United States and it becomes federally legal, it'll be interesting to see where exports are going versus what's staying in the US. So food safety in the hemp and cannabis industry, why does it matter? Why is it important? So a lot of folks are saying that it is, like the Wild West, a little, low regulation. A cannabis company may have a lot of expertise in their grow or their production or how they're making their products, but may not have things together for their actual food safety process, limiting recalls and good manufacturing practices, which we'll get to in a minute. So the biggest thing that's coming out of this, other than or in parallel with consumer safety, are recalls. Some of you in this room may have a company that's dealt with a recall. If you have a company and you don't have a recall plan in place, you need to do that pretty quick. Recalls are the downfall of a lot of companies. If it gets out on social media, if it gets listed on a state website, that's not going to trend very well for your company. The big things right now that are triggering recalls are mold and yeast, and then in the testing world, the pesticides, the heavy metals, and potentially just even the wrong packaging. Even if your product is clean, if it's packaged incorrectly or not labeled right, that can trigger a recall depending on what state you're in, and then the general public is going to think there's a problem with your product when actually there's not, it was your labeling. So these are crucial things to keep in check when you're putting your products together. Just a couple little screen clips from what's out there. In Nevada, one company is hitting 30 dispensaries, that's a recall. That gets out in the news. Now you've got 30 dispensaries that aren't selling their product, and you've got to maybe create a whole other brand name for the same product just to save yourself in your market. Colorado, 49 hospitalized, 4 dead. I believe this one was from mold, which inhaled or smoked in certain situations, if you already have asthma or other breathing difficulties, can result in some pretty bad stuff. Here in Michigan, what they call homegrown. I don't know this company personally, but it's this is out there for public consumption and to review of different types of recalls. Nobody wants their company on the Fox 47 News for any kind of a recall. So, what are the responsibilities of the producer? You want to grow your product correctly. You want to make your products correctly. You want to implement the appropriate controls, and you need to get your whole company on board. If you're going to start doing a good manufacturing practices or a GMP program or an ISO 9001, it's hard for people to change their ways. It's hard for people to need to do another new form or something that, paperwork that nobody gets excited about. But the first thing you got to do is sit your team down and say, we're going to do this. Here's the checklist. Here's what we got to do. Let's all get on the bus and let's all do this. You'll see, or you may have heard in different types of programs, different types of regulations, we need to do CFR 110. We need to do CFR 211. That's the Code of Federal Regulations. That regulates hundreds, if not thousands of items, not just in our food chain, but in baby food and how products are manufactured, things of that nature. And so the Perry Johnson companies, we didn't invent good manufacturing practices. We took those practices and created our own checklist specific for the cannabis and hemp industry. So when you see the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR 110, that's the basis of many GMP programs that are out there right now in the food world. And again, there are specific things relative to infant formula, packaging methods, other types of foods. We're not going to get into that. It doesn't really touch on cannabis, but it's a very interesting read about what the feds allow in your food. Okay? Specifically, I don't have a pointer. So interestingly enough, in broccoli, if you see at the top there, you can have, as long as you have less than an average of 60 aphids or mites per 100 grams, you can still let your broccoli go out into the market. Pineapple juice. If your average mold count in the juice is 15% or less, good to go. Tomatoes, canned tomatoes. If you have less than an average of 10 or more fly eggs per 500 grams or 2 or more maggots per 500 grams, you're still meeting the federal guidelines for getting your food out into the market. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the cannabis space moving forward. If it, when it goes federally legal, how these codes are going to transform into cannabis. If they're allowing this for tomatoes and pineapple juice and broccoli, are they going to allow this for cannabis? So right now, I think the cannabis market as a whole does not even touch anything near this level because of the testing requirements that are in place. So in terms of cannabis and hemp testing, to touch on, especially in the state of Michigan, and the product testing of the cannabis or the hemp, a lot of things come up in between labs. Some of you out here that are growers know that you could probably send a sample to 3 labs and you might get 3 different potency results. How is that lab actually testing the cannabis? What is their method? What type of technology are they using? Are they being ethical? Are they dry labbing? Are they receiving cash to just give a better result? These things are happening in certain states. Most labs, I believe, are on the up and up and are operating ethically, especially if they're becoming accredited to ISO 17025. So when you are getting your product tested, if you're interviewing a lab and you're getting a supply chain item tested, flavorings, soil, the water that you're using to grow, things of that nature, you want to make sure that the lab is accredited to this particular standard. And then you also want to find out, how is the sampling being conducted? Is the grow operation picking the samples themselves and sending it to the lab? Is the lab going in to the grow and actually picking the samples and having a true independent review of those samples? How often is the testing being done? And again, obviously we talked about credentialing. And then what tests are being conducted? What is your lab capable of doing? In the state of Michigan, California, Massachusetts, Illinois, other states that require 17025 accreditation, there's kind of a panel, a list of tests that the lab has to show proficiency to, that your product has to go through the testing realm of obviously the potency, the terpenes, heavy metals, pathogens, yeast molds, pesticides, big one is pesticides, and then the micropathogens. E. coli, salmonella, listeria. If you are right now extracting and making products, doing gummies, vape cartridges, when's the last time anybody did an environmental swab, had your stainless steel tested for listeria, had your drains tested for salmonella? These are the things to be proactive about, because if there's a recall and something terrible happens, you can say, look, we had an environmental monitoring plan. We swipe our stuff once a month. We're making a good faith effort versus having nothing in place at all. And God forbid you get in front of a jury, those are the types of items that can show that you've made a good faith effort to do the right thing versus having nothing at all in place. Same thing with packaging. As a lot of you are aware, most states, I would argue, kind of have the same packaging requirements in terms of, it can't look like Flintstones vitamins or something that a kid is going to think is a candy, and all of a sudden they just ate a 50 milligram, gummy, and or grandma ate one and she's walking around the backyard, doesn't know what's going on because it's just got really dosed. So make sure your packaging is labeled correctly. Are you meeting the metric requirements? Can you proclaim what lab did the test? When was this tested? So that's very, very important. So we're talking about all these things that can cause problems. How can you sort of set yourself up to not have these problems, or at least try to do the right thing? There's different types of certifications out there that you can achieve that can help put these things in place for your company. And there's really only a few. So the concept of third-party certification is having a private third party like Perry Johnson come into your facility and be an independent set of eyes to review a certain checklist. It could be a good agricultural practices checklist, it could be good manufacturing practices, or it could be for an overall quality certification. Most likely it's called ISO 9001. And so any given state that you're in may or may not require these, but by having this in place, you may dramatically lower your insurance cost. I just talked with one of the biggest cannabis insurance carriers in the nation twice in the last week, and they brought on the fact that if a company has a quality certification in place from a legitimate company like Perry Johnson or one of our competitors, you undoubtedly can save money on your general liability insurance, your product recall insurance. So there's a lot of, I'm not an insurance specialist, but I learned a lot, and there are many different options out there, and so you definitely want to dig into that. Who's covering your recalls, your errors and omissions, things of that nature. There's many things to review. So Perry Johnson Food Safety, we actually took the good manufacturing practices, philosophy, and overall checklists, and we put that together and added requirements relative to the cannabis and hemp space. And we then had that checklist in our program blessed by an industry group called ANSI, American National Standards Institute. They're a nonprofit, peer-driven group that approves standards and situations that folks have in place for any given industry. There's ANSI standards for automotive, other laboratory situations, food safety, things like that. So when we come in to do a good manufacturing practices audit, we have our harmonized standard regardless of what state you're in. And then depending on what state you're in, there may be some additional requirements based on waste disposal, employee training, things of that nature, sanitation that may be above and outside a GMP audit that we will put as an addendum. We've had a lot of questions about, we want to get organic for our cannabis grow. Well, the organic program is run by the USDA, which is a federal program, and you cannot get organic status for cannabis. You can for hemp and your hemp products. You cannot get it for cannabis. However, the state of California right now put into law January 1st, they're actually doing an organic program for cannabis in the state of California that basically mimics what the USDA has in place, and that's going to be a state organic program for cannabis grows. I think that's going to start tidal waving through the rest of the United States because obviously folks, having something organic is pretty valuable in the marketplace. And I think that's gonna start happening within other states, that they're going to copy this program so that growers can proclaim themselves as organic before it goes federally legal. So again, the types of food safety audits, you've got the classic, what is a good manufacturing practices audit? They usually take between 1 to 2 days, depending on the size of your facility and what you're making. They're not a huge 2-week-long process. And it really goes through the 5 classic points of GMP, right? Your people, your premises, your processes, your products, and your procedures. When those items are reviewed, it's always going to help your bottom line with profit. The other question, the other program that we get asked a lot about is, hey, we want to get ISO 9001 certified. ISO 9001 is the most widely available global quality certification that any company can get. You can be a cannabis company, you can be a metal stamping plant for GM, you can be growing strawberries for Jamba Juice. It boils down to the old ISO adage of document what you do and do what you document. And the whole concept of ISO started after World War II because there were so many factories and so many companies in the automotive industry that there was no way to standardize what company was better than another. There was no way to standardize how the parts were getting made and how to make all this efficient for these companies. So ISO 9001, the 2015 version, is the most recent and the one that most companies are being certified to. There are numerous cannabis companies in Michigan right now that have contracted with us for a GMP certification, and they're also doing ISO 9001. So different from GMP, the 5 processes we just talked about, ISO has more of quality management principles: customer focus, leadership, engagement of people and your employees, your process approach. How are you improving things? Are you making decisions based on evidence? Are you making decisions based on financial need? And your relationship management, environmental. It really boils down to there's a specific checklist for the industry that you're in, and the company that's sending an auditor to you to review that checklist at your company, that auditor needs to show that they've been trained, they've been certified as an auditor, and that they have the background to be able to come to your facility and do a good job. We're not going to send somebody who's a poultry manufacturing specialist to an automotive stamping plant. You just can't do that. You have to line up the abilities of the folks that are going out to do the audit. So again, what are the benefits for ISO certification? You can help streamline your processes, you can minimize your risks, you're going to be engaging your employees, you may have customer requirements to become ISO 9001, you can certainly help limit your recalls, and you're constantly reviewing your quality and what's going on in your company. So again, what is the difference from GMP? ISO 9001 or any given ISO standard is not going to say, show me your sanitation schedule. Where are you keeping your chemicals? Show me some signs about where your employees are supposedly washing their hands, things of that nature. ISO is going to focus on customer satisfaction, your quality system. It doesn't focus on specific product units. It focuses on standards, procedures, things of that nature, management reviews, how are you running your business. Again, ISO 9001 is not specific to any one product or industry, it's global. It does require a management representative that oversees your quality management system, your quality control, things of that nature. On the other hand, GMP can be specific to your industry. There's GMP certificates for dietary supplements, nutraceuticals, cosmetics, generic food, and now cannabis and hemp. GMP doesn't require a management review, a quality policy, or necessarily a purchasing process. So ISO 9001 and a GMP program, they complement each other. Right now in the cannabis and hemp world, most companies are getting a GMP certification or a GAP certification first, and then they're going to do the ISO 9001 and combine that into their company. We've worked with quite a few cannabis companies in Colorado, California, Oregon, and now in Michigan, this is definitely the trend to do GMP first and then add ISO 9001. And most shareholder companies that have shareholders or upper level venture capital, they know ISO 9001. They've seen this in other companies. They understand good manufacturing practices. They want to hedge the risk of a recall by knowing a company has these certifications in place and that people are keeping an eye on things. So again, GMP requires physical attributes, sanitation schedules, ease of cleaning, employee hygiene, heating and cooling, your production services, pest control, allergens, things of that nature. ISO 9001 wouldn't necessarily look at those things. So it's kind of a vice versa situation. In terms of becoming ISO 9001 certified, you would choose an accredited body that's globally recognized like Perry Johnson. You would need to determine your scope statement, production and distribution of cannabis. You need to determine your effective employee count. You need to have a quality management representative. And you need to actually purchase a copy of the ISO 9001 standard and be familiar with it. How are you ready for an audit, right? Ourselves or other certification bodies can come in and do what's called a pre-audit, which is basically a dry run of your system that has nothing to do with the outcome of your audit. At the end of that, there would be a report as to what would have been shortcomings had it been the official audit. As a certification body, we can tell you what those gaps are, but we can't actually put those solutions in place for you or give you those procedures. That's where a consultant or a third-party private company could do those things for you. Again, the steps for certification, you would choose a certification body, schedule your audit, work on a pre-assessment, get the audit done, and then fix your corrective actions. Typically, this is not a pass-fail scenario. It's just a matter of what your corrective actions are and how systemic they are. But I want to kind of skip back here for a second. Let's see here. Because we had a lot of questions about GMP. So I was at a grow operation in Colorado Springs about 4 years ago, 3 rooms set up. I was in their middle room, and what should have smelled pretty good, like cannabis being grown, I walked in there and it kind of smelled like a zoo. There were little chunks of carrot on the floor and these little brown pellets, and I was talking to I guess he's the operations manager, like, what's going on? He goes, well, look in the corner. I look in the corner and there's like a 3-foot by 3-foot tortoise named Jose, the security turtle or tortoise that was just allowed to roam in their grow room, that ate carrots and just pooped on the floor. Zero effort to even sweep it up or clean it up. People stepping in that stuff, walking to another room, walking through like this actually happened. And so I'll never forget that. And since then I've probably been in 30 different grow ops, 30 different processing places of all different types. Some are more mom and pop, some are very pharmaceutical, and you can certainly tell the difference between the companies. So a lot of the things that have come up in these tours and the audits that we've done are not necessarily deal breakers where somebody would, we don't have the ability to shut down anybody. Some states may say, we want to know if you're doing an audit, there's something traumatic going on that, you need to report that to us. Michigan doesn't necessarily have that. So a lot of the other items that came up were simple things like hairnets, dangling jewelry, cell phones, security. There was a company in Michigan that I went to visit that's a grow op, a pretty legitimate big one. They fired 7 people because they were employees were taking their water bottles, like a Yeti, into the trim area, empty water bottle, and they figured out where the blind spots were in the cameras and were filling up their water bottles with brand new flour and just taking it home every day as a little self bonus to themselves versus probably getting a couple home rolls for free. otherwise from their company. So they had 7 people that got fired that had been doing this for possibly a year, every single day, right out the door, 7 water bottles. I don't even know what that adds up to, but so security is a big issue. Not in the sense that you don't trust your employees, but knowing what's going on. The insurance company that I was mentioning before, their biggest claim in the last 2 years are all security issues, not employees getting hurt, not recalls, laboratories being broken into by bad guys that think there's a boatload of marijuana in the lab, which we all know there's not. There's small samples. The $1 million testing equipment, never stolen, just the samples. So how strong are your doors? How strong are your video cameras, your key cards, things of that nature? Employee hygiene. Are folks washing their hands when they go to the bathroom? Where is the bathroom? Are you going through the finance offices to get to the bathroom? Are you going outside? What happens after you take a smoke break? Do you put new gowns on, if you will, or new PPE when you go inside? Things of that nature. Pest control. Do you have a pest control program? Yeah, we got a couple rat traps. We put them out there. Okay, well, how often are they checked? Does Fred go around once a day and check the traps? Does he go around once a week? Are you documenting this? Can you show this? Standing water. I've almost tripped over hoses in some production places and grow ops, so there's just hoses all over the place, public water everywhere. Sanitation schedules. Yeah, we mop the floor once a week, or we wipe down the stainless steel. Okay, is somebody actually required to do that? Are you tracking that? Do you have that written down on a daily basis? When you say they need to mop the floor, what exactly are they mopping the floor with? Is it just 5 gallons of water? Is it 1 part bleach? Things of this nature to know that you're doing a good job with your sanitation program. So again, steps to certification. You need to say, hey, we want to become GMP, we want to become ISO 9001. Reach out to a reputable company like Barry Johnson and talk, what's a realistic guideline, right? We want to get GMP as soon as possible, man. We need this thing. We got a customer, we got to have GMP. Okay, that's cool. You got to get your documents in place, right? You got to get your procedures in place. There are many companies, many resources out there online for a sanitation schedule or a pest control schedule. You don't need to reinvent the wheel and type all this up, yourself from scratch. There are numerous resources out there. And then you need to actually do an internal audit on yourself. Somebody on your team that's qualified would go through the checklist, and you would actually be honest with yourself and do an audit on yourself as to what your shortcomings are and how you're going to fix those things. Once you've done all that, or you plan to do that, that's when you would talk to us and we would schedule your audit for you. We're probably about 60 days out on being able to do an audit right now because of how busy the industry is. So even if you're not ready for an audit, the benefit to going under contract sooner than later is that you can secure those audit dates and have that as a goal for your team. And then we also give you what's called I think it's in there somewhere. We give you what's called a pending letter of certification, which is written on our letterhead and shows you've committed to the GMP process or whatever food safety process you need to go through. And sometimes that can placate existing customers to show that it's not just lip service, that you're actually in process of getting this done. Once the audit's done, there was a closing meeting, and just like, as a restaurant inspection or what have you, there's some things at a restaurant inspection that they could shut you down for right off the bat. Most things, most situations, that's not going to happen. Corrective actions are usually just given back to us in writing. Yes, we are going to have a more detailed sanitation plan. Here is what our plan is going to be moving forward. We don't need to send an auditor back to you to verify that. If it's in writing and we sign off on it, then you're good to go. This is an annual certification, so the next year when you recertify, you've already been through the process. It'll probably be a lot easier, not as intimidating. But the auditor may look at some of those corrective actions and say, hey, last audit you said you were going to do X, Y, and Z with your sanitation schedule or pest control or making sure people took off their necklaces or their earrings. how's that been working out for you? So it's kind of trust but verify in the certification world that our clients in any given company has actually done those corrective actions. And again, the certificate's good for a year. Again, the benefits of certification, you're going to mitigate your risks for recall. You're going to be able to promote your products. You can produce in a GMP certified facility. You can put those labels on your product. There's specific rules about how you can do that versus the Perry Johnson logo versus just saying GMP certified. So you can absolutely use that to your advantage and compare that to your competition. Because no dispensary, unless you're vertically integrated, they don't want to deal with a recall. That even that dispensary might lose business because their name was even mentioned as having a product that got recalled, even though they have nothing to do with it. So that's how you build those relationships and that trust with the product. And again, the big thing, reduce recalls and save money. In terms of our specific cannabis safety standard, which I kind of went through a bit before, we have the GAP requirements, which is in Michigan, it's more good agriculture and collection practices, which is now required in Michigan for certain situations with clones, under 8 inches, selling to dispensaries. And so, although the entire standard, obviously, we're not going to go through it. After this presentation, if anybody wants a copy of it, I can email it to you, and it's also available on our website. So our GAP requirements go through, your operations, your post-harvest operations, storage and transport. Are you transporting your clones to another grow, right? What kind of vehicle is it going in? Was that semi just shipping chickens last week? Did they power wash it out? Did they sanitize it, right? Is it your vehicle? Know your vendors, know what they're doing. Worker health and hygiene. It's amazing how many places I've been where it's assumed that you wash your hands when you come out of the bathroom. But you have to put up signs. If people see a sign, they're more likely to actually do it, to actually wash their hands. I don't know what the specific numbers are, but a pretty old school auditor told me that, and I thought that it made pretty good sense. Especially with COVID and coming out of COVID. How are you checking people into your facility? Are they signing their names? Are you actually taking a temperature? Do you need to do that anymore? Are you documenting those things? For indoor cultivation, the big things that I've seen, which are also in this checklist, how are you handling floor drains? Where are you keeping pallets? Do you know the expiration dates of your fertilizers? Are you using approved pesticides or none at all? Where do you have rat traps within your grow room? Are you changing your filters? What types of filters are you using? Do you glass light bulbs with no plastic covering on it? God forbid a light bulb falls right into your vape machine, or you're making gummies or chocolates. How do you deal with that? And again, ultimately, even though we can do these certifications and we can come out and do these audits, it's up to the company to be aware of what the requirements are. Somebody on your team has to be the compliance director or know the checklist in and out, know what the state requirements are, work with your attorney, things of that nature. There's not a lot of gotchas in Michigan for the requirements or other states. A lot of it is just GMP, common sense, but different states have different requirements for getting rid of the waste, how you're tracking that, things of that nature. Again, this is a copy of what a pending letter would look like from us to be able to use with clients. Some states will allow a pending letter to get a provisional license that shows you're in process of either getting your lab accredited or in process of getting a GMP certification. I can't promise a pending letter would work in every situation, but depending on what state you're in, that has helped a lot of companies. Again, our cannabis GMP standard is available on our website for download. There's no cost or any email follow-up or anything cheesy like that. We just want to get the information out there, and if you guys review it and think we're worthy of working with you, then reach out to us. And again, my name is Brett McMillen. I'm the Cannabis and Hemp Division Manager. all this information is going to be on the website after the show, and if there's any questions or anything, I'd be happy to answer them right now. And if not, I hope you guys have a great show. And Andrew Brisboe from the state of Michigan is going to be presenting later this afternoon. I think that's going to be a really good one to try and attend and witness. So. Any questions?
It's a little specific, but
It's okay.
the code reader, I know, has a little trouble with parsing. Is that something that you may be able to? Basically, they keep failing for parsing.
Okay. Yeah, I'm definitely not a PhD chemist. Arsenic does occasionally come up, even naturally in the soil, just like listeria. We've accredited probably 10 laboratories in Michigan for the ISO 17025 standard. So, afterwards I can get your information and, refer you to those labs and they can do some forensic testing on